Hey everybody, this is Professor Diffley. This is Philosophy 201, Applied Ethics, Ethics in the Modern World. This is Module 3. So these are first of the videos for the Module 3 lecture slides where we're going to look at utilitarianism and Kantian ethics. As you can see by the subtitle, consequentialist versus non-consequentialist ethics. What does that mean? Let's just start from there. What that means is one of them is going to view the ethical, whether something is ethical, good, permissible, ethically permissible, based on the consequences of the action. That's utilitarianism. It's going to base it, we don't know whether something is good or bad unless we know the outcome. Non-consequentialists are going to say the outcome doesn't matter. What we're going to focus on are rules, right? Here are ethical rules we should all live by, and that's how we determine whether or not something is ethical. And we'll get into more of that as we go through the videos. Again, so these are going to be an overview of the lecture slides. There are required videos on utilitarianism and Kantian ethics that they're required, but as I said in the intro video, they're really good and really important. They match what's said in the book in many ways. They cover some of the same ground. The textbook goes into more detail, so obviously you got to use them both, but really watch those. So I'm going to try to keep these videos going through the lecture slides a little shorter, but I wanted you to hear my voice since I can't see you, since we're in person, unfortunately. So we'll go through this here. Now, let's get into this. So going on to the next slides here. So yeah, what we're going to do, we're going to start with utilitarianism. So this is chapter 1 in the text. So a consequentialist approach. So really, what are these? These are the learning objectives. You can see these in the slide yourself as you go through them. They're also on Blackboard that you can see as you're going through them yourself. You can jump out to the videos wherever there's links here for that. And again, in the text, there are hyperlinks out to YouTube videos. They're required YouTube videos. So you could, as you're reading, I really recommend as you're going through, you're looking at this, look at the video, jump back and forth so you get it all together there. I try to keep it so you don't have to jump around as much. Really, consequentialist moral ethical theories, what are we talking about here? Again, as I said earlier, consequentialists really focus on outcomes, right? What makes an action right is its consequences. And that's really what we're going to look at, right? How much good does it produce? We're going to see there's critiques of this because it could seemingly justify lots of bad things if you could say it leads to a good. We'll get into that more later. So an example of this, though, of consequentialists. They're going to say telling a lie, well, it's not always either good or bad. It's going to depend on the situation and what the outcome is. So to consequentialists, telling a lie is considered wrong only if it leads to more unhappiness than other options there. So an example of this would be like telling a white lie. One way to look at this, telling a white lie to protect a friend or family's feelings, something like that. That would be, if it's going to make them better to lie, which again, that's questionable, but that's kind of what it's looking at. But it would also say even bigger lies. This isn't going to just hold it to what, maybe me and you think of as a white lie, a tiny, seemingly unharmful lie. So if the lie creates good or good, then telling a lie is permissible. That's what it's going to say. We're going to say the opposite of that. Kant is going to say, deontological ethics, it doesn't matter what the outcome is, lying is always wrong. And that's the rule we should live by. You should not lie, which is, also a difficult rule to live by, but we'll get to that. So, utilitarianism is based on another broader ethical concept of hedonism. So not heathens, but hedonistic. Hedonistic is really focuses on the way it's usually used. It's, people focus on pleasures, worldly pleasures more than anything else. So it's really a theory of well-being, but, we're going to measure that by happiness, pleasure. So again, they believe what defines successful life is related to the amount of pleasure in that life. And this is where it can get tricky, is how do we determine that pleasure? No other factors are relevant, right? Just how much pleasure you have. So in some ways, this can mean for a hedonist, if your idea of happiness is just sitting around playing video games all the time, that's what makes you happy, cool, that's what makes you happy. For others, if what makes them happy is working or reading, studying Shakespeare or whatever, that's what makes them happy. We're going to see there's going to be some disagreement over that maybe we should value some things higher than others. Others are going to say whatever makes a happiness. So that's what hedonism is. But hedonism can have really negative consequences too if you think of it this way. If you're only interested in pleasure, it can go to some, really negative outcomes there, right? I mean, you can make the argument, right? Oh, well, I like to do drugs, or I like to drink. Well, we all know there's really, really, really significant consequences, negative significant consequences, if you took that to extremes. So again, it's not as always clear cut as it's going to be. But the more pleasure you have, the better that life goes, is the view. Now, where does this all come from? It starts with Jeremy Bentham, and you can read more about him in the textbook there. He's a consequentialist and a relativistic view. What do we mean by relativistic? It means what I was saying before. It depends, right? It's relative to the situation. It's relative to what people value, that sort of thing. And again, it's hedonistic utilitarianism. What his view is that people are motivated, his view was people are motivated by the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, right? And this seems pretty straightforward. We'd all rather, the vast majority do not find pleasure in pain, right? Most of us are trying to avoid pain. And pain here can be not just physical pain, but, obviously we all know pain can be in measured in different ways. So why is it called utilitarianism? Well, utility, right? That has utility is useful, right? So utility, which is what we're going for, is promoted when pleasure is promoted and when unhappiness is avoided. So again, it boils down to its morality of an act is therefore determined by the amount of happiness produced. It's also a maximizing system. Now, what do we mean by that? It does not merely require that pleasure is promoted, right? Because that can be broad. What we're trying to find is the greatest amount of pleasure. But this is really important. It's not just about you individually, is how Bentham is going to focus this. You're looking for, so if we're going to sum up utilitarianism in one phrase, it is the greatest pleasure for the greatest number, right? The greatest good for the greatest amount, something like that. So we're trying to find the greatest pleasure for the greatest number of people. Now, you don't really take yourself into consideration in this. You are just a small part in this. You can't just prioritize yours. You're trying to find happiness for all. So this means that some actions that lead to pleasure are not moral because there are other options out there that would have been brought in even more pleasure to more people. So again, if your pleasure is just sitting there, and I'm not picking on video games here because I love video games, but if I sit here and choose to play video games 24 hours a day, not work, do anything like that, you can see how that's maybe not the best way, right? It might give me some pleasure. Now, assuming I'm not, independently wealthy and I can just sit around and play video games and not have to worry about money. But, right, if you just sit there and do nothing, you're not going to bring in money. It could be detrimental to others, that sort of thing, right? So then maybe there are better choices to that. And you could see, maybe not spending money on something right now and saving it, you can lead to more pleasure down the line, if that makes sense. So did I skip one there? Yeah, so that's what we mean by maximize. So we're trying to find the greatest amount of pleasure for the greatest number. So again, motivations here do not matter, which is something we're going to find that most other ethical systems does not believe in, that your motivations behind doing something matter. Utilitarianism would say it doesn't matter. It's the outcome. So look at this. So say, here's an example. All right, I'm a burglar, right? So I'm going to break and enter. So I break into a house. I break open let's say a sliding glass door, right? As I break in, as I'm stepping into the house, I see the owner of the house passed out on the floor. So I run away. Now, what happened here is the person had been knocked out because of carbon monoxide poisoning. My act of breaking their window to rob their house saved them. So therefore, my action of attempting to rob them could conceivably said, was moral. Now, do you agree with that, right? The only reason, did I break that window to save them? No, I broke in to rob them. The fact that I saved them is just an accident, right? However, and my motivation is to rob, not to save. So Most ethical schools are going to say it's your motivation, right? So I shouldn't get credit for saving that person's life. Morally, I still broke and entered, right? I might not have taken anything, but I entered their home, right? Again, breaking and entering legally is I could just put my hand inside your house. That's breaking and entering. Utilitarians say, well, you saved the person, so you really shouldn't face any backlash for that. Others would argue not. So, but again, utilitarianism, motivation doesn't count, only the consequences, what we care about there. Now, the utility principle. How do we judge an ethical decision? So it's, again, things are right, good, or permissible as they tend to promote happiness. So as happiness increases, then it's more likely that the action is good. The opposite is also true. It's increasingly likely to be wrong if it creates the reverse of happiness, which is pain. There. So what we're looking for, again, promote the greatest pleasure for the greatest number of people in order to act morally. And again, our individual decision, we have to be objective in this. We're not looking at what's going to make us happy. It's what's going to make the most people happy. So how do we determine this? Well, we're going to go by consensus, right? What would the majority of people want? All or most of those with experience. Bentham actually thought it would be a group of sort of people from a cross-section, actually, that have had all these different experiences. We bring them together and let them decide. Obviously, we don't have a situation like that, but that's what it would look. Consensus. What does everybody want? Their experience would determine. He actually argued that we would actually create a hierarchy of pleasures. We'd have a list of things that are best. But obviously that's hard to do. But we got to try to come up with a consensus of what is considered the best outcomes. And again, like I said, this down here, it requires a person to be strictly impartial and disinterested spectator in assessing his or her own happiness versus that of others. So we do not put ourselves first in trying to determine this. Another comment, so that's utility principle, right? So utility principle, how do we figure out what the greatest happiness principle is? And when you look at greatest happiness principle, it's also the same as utility principle. Hedonistic calculus. So how do we provide a decision procedure for a utilitarian, right? So we don't know what to do. It's a morally tricky situation. It's a dilemma. There's multiple options here. We don't know which one to pick. Well, the goal to assess possible pleasures, and according to their, and this is supposed to be the list here, right? The intensity. So in the intensity, how much is it going to bring? The duration, how long will that happiness last, right? Something that might bring happiness now for a short term, but end up negative later. Or just, instant happiness with, it's fleeting. We're not going to rank that as high. Certainty. How certain, we can never predict the future. That's also a critique of utilitarianism. You don't know the consequences until it actually happens. But the certainty, a remoteness, how far into the future is the pleasure? We want more immediate pleasure. Fecundity, what does that mean? How likely is it the pleasure will generate other related pleasures, right? Will it have add-on, knock-on effects? Purity, is there a faint pain going to be? Is there a trade-off? We're going to try to find the least amount of trade-off as possible. And then the extent, how much? So this is, we're supposed to rank all these. This is a lot to take in, right? So imagine trying to make a decision in the instant, right? A split decision. You got to go through all this. This is the idea of the hedonistic calculus. That's why partly the argument is we need to have some of these rules ahead of time, which some will get into there. Actually, so I'm going to stop here. I'll pick up in lecture video 2, and we'll look at how others sought to build upon Bentham's utilitarianism in lecture video 2.